The bow trembled in my hand. Not a musician's vibrato, but a raw, ugly tremor born of pure fear. The four figures in the shadowed auditorium seats were a tribunal, their faces impassive slates. Juilliard's final audition. My whole life had been a straight, narrow path leading to this polished stage, to the unforgiving acoustics of this room. My fingers, slick with sweat, felt alien on the fingerboard. I practiced the piece, Brahms' violin concerto, until my fingertips were ridged and numb, until the melody was woven into my DNA. But now, under the sterile white stage lights, the notes were strangers. I drew the bow across the strings. The sound that came out was thin, a scratchy, desperate whine. It was the sound of a nerve fraying. I tried to recover, to find the rich, sonorous tone I could produce so easily in my bedroom, but my wrist was locked tight. The music was trapped inside me, banging against my ribs, while this pathetic noise filled the hall. Their faces didn't change. No pity, no encouragement, just clinical observation. One of them, a woman with severe silver hair, made a small note on her pad. The scratch of her pen was louder than my violin. In the back row, just beyond the official judging area, sat my family. My mom, wringing her hands, my dad, staring at the floor, and my Uncle Frank, his arms crossed over his thick chest, a faint, knowing smirk on his face. Frank, who fixed transmissions for a living, who smelled of grease and honest labor. Frank, who always called my violin my squeaky box. "You can't make a living on that thing, kid," he'd say at every family dinner. "It's a hobby. You need a trade, something real." His smirk was the final blow. Something inside me snapped. The music died completely. I stood there, bow hanging limply, the silence a physical thing pressing in on me. It was heavier than any sound I could have made. "Thank you, Mr. Rossi," the woman with the silver hair said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "That will be all." I didn't nod. I didn't say thank you. I just turned and walked off the stage, the heat of shame crawling up my neck. Backstage, I fumbled my violin into its velvet-lined case, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the latches. The walk to the parking lot was a funeral procession. My mom tried to put an arm around me. I flinched away. "It's okay, Leo," she whispered. "No, it's not." Uncle Frank clapped me hard on the shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt like a blow. "Hey, chin up. Now you can get serious. I can get you an apprenticeship down at the shop. You're good with your hands." I stopped dead in the middle of the concrete garage, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. I looked at his hands. Thick, calloused, grease permanently etched into the lines of his palms. He saw them as badges of honor, proof of a life spent doing real work. He saw my hands, long, slender, with carefully tended nails, as a sign of weakness. The rage that had been simmering for years, a low heat beneath every condescending comment, every dismissive joke, finally boiled over. But it didn't come out in a shout. It came out cold and quiet. "I'm never working in your garage, Frank," I said. My voice was flat, a dead tone. "Ever." He laughed, a loud, barking sound that echoed in the garage. "Okay, kid. Okay. Keep dreaming, but the world doesn't pay for dreams." That night, I packed a bag. I took my violin, a few changes of clothes, and the couple $100 I had saved from mowing lawns. I left a note on the kitchen counter that just said, "I have to do this." I took the late-night bus from our quiet suburban town into the heart of Manhattan. Not the Manhattan of concert halls and high culture, but the Lower East Side, where the rents were cheap and the sirens were a constant lullaby. The next 6 years were a blur of grinding poverty and obsessive practice. I found a room in a tenement building that smelled of boiled cabbage and old sorrows. It was barely big enough for my single mattress and my music stand. My window looked out onto a brick wall. That wall became my audience. I washed dishes in a greasy spoon diner from 6 in the evening until 2 in the morning. The hot water and harsh soap were hell on my hands, but I'd come home, my back aching, and soak my fingertips in olive oil before I picked up my violin. I'd practice with a heavy rubber mute clamped on the bridge, turning Brahms and Bach into ghostly whispers that wouldn't wake my neighbors. Loneliness was a constant companion. It was a physical ache, a hollowness in my chest. There were nights I'd sit on my mattress, the violin in its case, and just stare at it, hating it. Hating the promise it held, a promise that felt like a lie. I'd think of Uncle Frank's garage, the smell of oil, the steady work, the easy laughter. The thought was a temptation, a warm, safe place to hide from the cold reality of my failure. I'd call home once a month. The conversations were strained. "How are you, Leo?" my mom would ask, her voice tight with worry. "I'm good, Ma, really good. I have a lot of auditions lined up." It was a lie. I was too terrified to audition. The memory of that silent jury was a scar I couldn't bear to touch. Sometimes Frank would get on the phone. "Still squeaking away on that fiddle? You know, my guy Manny just retired. I got an open spot for a good apprentice. The offer still stands." "I'm fine, Frank," I'd say, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. "Thanks." The restraint was a physical effort. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him about the hours I practiced, about the bone-deep weariness, about the tiny, incremental improvements that only I could hear. But I said nothing. His disbelief was the fuel I burned to stay warm. The change didn't come in a sudden, cinematic flash. It was slow, a gradual chipping away at the wall of fear. I started playing for tips in the Washington Square Park fountain. At first, my hands would shake, just like they did at the audition. But out there, with no one expecting anything, something loosened. The tourists and students worked a jury. They were just people. I learned to play for them, for the joy of a child dancing to a Vivaldi riff, for the dollar bill a hurried businessman would drop in my open case. One afternoon, an old man with a long gray beard sat on a bench and listened for a solid hour. When I finished, he came over. "You have a fire in your playing," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "But your technique is a cage. You are fighting yourself." His name was Anton. He had been first chair viola for the Met Opera for 30 years before he retired. He offered to give me lessons, for free. He said it offended him to hear so much passion trapped in a faulty vessel. Anton was brutal. He broke down everything I thought I knew. He made me practice scales for 8 hours a day for months, until my arms felt like they would fall off. He didn't praise me. He just grunted when I got something right and swore in Russian when I got it wrong. He rebuilt me from the ground up. A year later, he told me I was ready. He got me an audition for a small, scrappy chamber orchestra that played in church basements and community centers. I got the job. It didn't pay much, but it was a start. I quit the diner. For the first time in years, I was earning a living, however meager, with my violin. From there, things started to move. One gig led to another. A solo in a small production got noticed by a critic from a local arts blog. That review got me an agent. The agent got me better auditions. I failed a lot of them, but the fear was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet, cold focus, forged in Anton's tutelage and the lonely years in my tiny room. The big break came during a performance of a modern, dissonant piece with a quartet in a small gallery in Chelsea. I didn't know he was there. No one did. But in the front row sat Simon Fisher, the legendary conductor of the New York Philharmonic. After the show, he came backstage. He was a tall, imposing man with eyes that seemed to see right through you. He didn't say much. He just looked at me and said, "I am conducting Mendelssohn's Concerto next season. My soloist has withdrawn. I want you." My picture was in the New York Times a week later. The headline read, "From Obscurity to the Philharmonic, the Fiery Rise of Leo Rossi." I didn't send the article to my family. My mom saw it anyway. She called me, weeping. "Leo, we're so proud. Why didn't you tell us?" "I was busy, Ma," I said. The excuse felt thin, even to me. The night of the performance at Carnegie Hall, the world went silent. As I stood in the wings, I could hear the murmur of the packed house, the rustle of programs. I felt the familiar jolt of adrenaline. But it wasn't fear. It was electricity. When I walked out onto that hallowed stage, the lights felt warm, welcoming. I looked out at the sea of faces, and I saw no jury. I saw an audience waiting. I played. I didn't just play the notes. I poured all of it in. The shame of the failed audition, the years of lonely practice, the sting of Frank's laughter, the smell of the dishwater, Anton's gruff commands, the joy of playing in the park. It all came out through the strings. The music was a living thing, a torrent that swept through the hall. When the final note faded, there was a moment of perfect, profound silence. Then the place erupted. I didn't go home for another 2 years. I toured the world, London, Vienna, Tokyo. I made a name for myself. I bought a decent apartment on the Upper West Side with a window that overlooked the park. I was successful, but there was still a knot in my stomach that hadn't quite dissolved. The call came from my mom. It was Uncle Frank's 60th birthday. They were having a big party at the house, the one I grew up in. "Everyone will be there, Leo," she said, a plea in her voice. "Please, it would mean the world to your father, and to Frank." I didn't want to go, but I knew I had to. It was a final string that needed to be tied off. I rented a car, a sleek black German sedan that was worlds away from the clunkers Frank spent his life fixing. Driving back to my old neighborhood felt like traveling through time. The same neat lawns, the same oak trees. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. I pulled into the driveway behind a line of sensible American-made cars. I could hear the party in the backyard, loud music, laughter. I took a deep breath and got out. Walking through the house was strange. The same pictures on the wall, the same faint scent of my mom's cooking. I stepped out onto the back deck, and the party quieted for a second. Heads turned. Whispers followed. I saw cousins, aunts, old neighbors.